A full decade has passed since my book Mend It Better rolled off the presses, and this really got me thinking, where am I now? How did I get here? You're listening to CraftLeftovers. I'm your host, Kristen M. Roach, a classically trained artist, author of Mend It Better, and creator of 3 thriving product-based businesses, art, craft, and tea. And today I'm embarking on a year-long project celebrating a decade of creative work by not just myself, but the contributors of Mend It Better. You see, this month marks 10 years since it was released by Story Publishing. A full decade has passed since my book Mend It Better rolled off the presses, and this really got me thinking, where am I now? How did I get here? And I'm not the only one. There were 21 contributors to the book, and after looking them all up, I found some were still crafting strong, and all the others used the skills they had honed in the craft industry to get permanent positions in related fields. I have many questions, so I decided to ask, and they answered. Over the next year, we'll be posting a new interview with these dynamic, creative people answering the questions you all probably have too, starting with me. You might be asking, what's this book about mending things better? Well, check the show notes for a link directly to signed copies. The book is no longer in print, but you can get the digital edition and signed copies from a handful of independent booksellers and public libraries. I linked to all of them in the show notes. Okay, now back to the story. That's right. It would be a little weird to interview myself, so I'm telling you a story instead. We'll call it Blog to Book and Back Again, A Crafter's Tale. Yeah, I did just listen to The Hobbit, and while I was laid up for my booster shot, it was such a trip down memory lane and just what I needed while I was piled under blankets feeling like utter garbage. I know you've probably had this feeling recently too. Seriously, though, it was a wild ride from there to here, and I'd love to share it with you. Hopefully, it'll answer many of your questions, like how does one go from blogger to a book author, or from a book author to a curator, or a curator to a tea shop owner, and why go back to craft blogging after 7 years of near radio silence? Well, first things first, I never really wanted to give up craft, but at the same time, the universe was really walking me down a different path. We'll start off with the blog. Why did I start Craft Leftovers to begin with? Well, my grandma always let me use her sewing machine to make creations, and I had a huge stock of craft supplies that she let me use when I was a little kid. I have so many memories of her guiding my stitches and sifting through scratchy lace and fluffy fleece. But as soon as I went to high school, I dropped craft like a bad habit. It wasn't cool enough for me. I was a painter and artist, not a seamstress and crafter like my grandma. And then my grandma passed away. It's actually 20 years ago this week. And in my grief, I hoarded her supplies. It felt like it was my last connection to her. Realistically, I hadn't made anything with craft supplies in years. So, surrounded by these supplies in my tiny apartment in college, I started to teach myself how to sew and then crochet. Knitting did always elude me, though, until Jason, enter my partner. He taught me to knit, and that really got things rolling. I got a job at the local yarn shop, and that fast-tracked my knitting skills and pattern writing skills. I started Craft Leftovers shortly after that, in 2006, 2007, and I really needed a way to keep mine and my grandma's stash accountable. The mission was really simple. Each month, I make a thing from my stash, and I share how I made that thing on my blog. Easy. Now, I'm not going to talk so much about how the craft industry has changed, but how my approach to running a creative product-based business has changed. I will mention that back in 2006, when I started the blog, I was one of 2 eco-craft blogs and one of only a handful of craft blogs in general. There wasn't a guidebook or class. We were making things up as we went along. And while it was easier to get noticed, there's less voices in the crowd, sure, there wasn't any mentors or signposts along the way. Pretty quickly after starting the blog, I was encouraged to submit patterns to magazines, started contributing to other authors' books. And by the time I graduated college in 2008, I was posting nearly every day, new patterns every week. And I'm making all these zines each month. Mending on the Go is actually how story publishing found me. I'll link that in the show notes too. And I was selling craft kits, doing indie craft shows. I even had my zines featured in a museum in Sweden as part of an exhibit about the indie craft movement. Wow. What started as a fun side project had actually become my full-time job by the time I graduated college. It was wild. Pretty quickly, it built the foundation that led to being approached by story publishing. For most craft bloggers, including myself, this is like the goal. And here I was, like not even 29 and hitting it. During that same time frame, I was also studying herbalism and getting married and buying my first house and painting an 80-foot mural. And this was all 2010, 2011. So I pushed harder and I worked harder. The book came out in late winter 2012, and it was so beautiful. It is so beautiful. In many ways, the craft industry is as it always was. But now there are many more voices and resources in the industry. One of the biggest shifts, I feel like, has been online classes and webinars. I remember when we launched my book, we tried to do this online event, and people were just not ready to tune into an online event. And I really didn't have another option but to travel from California to Chicago and do blog tours. But even with all this hustle and grind, I was still barely scraping by. Looking back, I really can't believe it, but within a year of my book launching, I had several major life changes happen. First, well, these aren't necessarily in chronological order, pulled them from my memory. CraftLeftovers was actually hacked for the first time. WordPress has a lot of vulnerabilities, and so at first we weren't exactly surprised. We maintained backups and stuff, and so we got it back online. But unfortunately, it was a series of hacks, and we would put it back up, and it would go down again. And eventually, what happened is there was a really malicious hack, and they deleted our entire server. So, like, we had backups of the blog, but they were stored on the server. And we had backups on hard drives, but the hard drive had corrupted. It was like, oh my goodness. It was so demoralizing. Around the same time, I got the opportunity to become a curator at a local art center. And I was like, okay, all right. I also got pregnant and I gave birth to our daughter. So this is still all within that like year time frame. And then after the birth of our daughter, I had several major health events. Like we're talking seizures, emergency surgery, and really other exciting, traumatizing things like that. So I started a new at-home business, Littlewoods, because a nonprofit, well, it wasn't really able to pay enough to cover childcare and the pile of medical bills we faced. And due to the hacking of CraftLeftovers, that income source that I had built up over 7 years or so dried up. So that's kind of how the universe booted me out of the craft industry, or dumped me on the face, dumped me on the curb. It wasn't really the craft industry per se, just a series of kind of unfortunate events. And kind of in a way also kind of ousted me from the curatorial industry or curatorial world. It's weird to think I founded Littlewoods in 2013. That's just 1 year after my book came out. And by 2016, I had shifted from being a craft pattern author to a curator to owning Littlewoods and opening a brick and mortar store in just 4 short years. For me, being able to take time off work when needed and having a flexible schedule became completely vital for my health. Post CraftLeftovers art curator and the Littlewoods startup, which was also pretty intense, Those all made life-work balance impossible, and I decided I could do better. I became dedicated to the mission of creating a business that was sustainable, both in the sense of environmental impact as well as continued creative output from myself in a healthy way. For instance, when I opened the brick and mortar store for Littlewoods, I hired employees right away so the hours would be stable, even if I had to take time off to recover from illness. I swear, I'll talk more about hiring your first employees or your 10th employee in a later live stream where I talk about creative entrepreneur topics in depth every second Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central Time. Okay, back to the story. So, while all this explains how I got from my blog to my book to tea apothecary owner, it doesn't really explain my motivation for getting back into crafting, craft podcasting, and blogging in particular. Just like a few major things transitioned me out of craft, it was another set of major things that brought it back into my life. Enter the 2020 pandemic, which is still ongoing. During the shutdown, Jason cleaned the heck out of our basement and found a singular hard drive that had the mythical lost backups of the CraftLeftovers blog, up to about 2013 when the first hack happened. And here's the thing. When he surprised me with the blog spun up on a production server for Christmas of 2020, I cried. I couldn't help it. It felt like this emotion came out of nowhere. And until that moment, I didn't know I had been burying this deep sadness and loss, and that I had been carrying that around with me. I poured so much of myself into the blog. It was more than just a series of patterns. It was more than just a business. It was 7 years of nearly daily journal entries during a formative time in my life. From college into career into motherhood. I know now that my lack of desire to craft had more to do with the loss of the CraftLeftovers blog than Jason and I ever realized. Now, okay, another little aside. The only thing we weren't able to restore were the PDF patterns. Hence the Pattern Archive Recovery Project. I'm going to link up to the show notes. Basically, we're identifying patterns that are missing, we're digging through that old hard drive, and we're getting it back online again. Okay, back to the story. Now, that explains how CraftLeftovers was put back online. But now the crafting side of it, because I just put out my first new pattern in years this month. Woo woo, like that's so exciting. It felt so good. It felt very normal. It felt like returning home. Around this same time, I cleaned my own studio and I gave serious thought to each and every project and pile of yarn. And I hadn't touched it in years. I kind of just shoved it away and buried it in my basement like I did my emotions. But going through this process of physically reconnecting with my supplies made me confront the pretty emotionally charged question of, do I want to let this go or keep it? And that forced me to face up to the fact that I need to either start using it or let it go to someone else who would. So I chose to use it. And like a huge circling arc, it brought me back to CraftLeftovers and keeping me accountable to using up my stash. Do you want to? Okay, another little quick aside. You really should join me March 9th for the live stream over on YouTube. I'm going to share some pretty embarrassing photos of the studio clean out and my process for tackling decluttering projects big and small that'll help spark your creative process. All right. The final big life thing that rekindled my joy of crafting, while it was surprising to me, it probably is not uncommon. Lucille. No, not my great aunt who gave me my first sewing machine. My daughter, Lucy. She's growing up. She's nearly 9 now. And she loves art and craft. Her passion has rekindled my own. It's as complex and as simple as that. We joke that my studio is the craft and art store anytime she's looking for a supply. That's what I called my grandma's supply wardrobe. It was a magical place. And it's brought me so much joy getting to share that with Lucy, like my grandma did with me. My grandma's influence on my life has lasted long after she passed and continues to this day. Art and craft have combined in my life just like her life. She sewed, but she also oil painted. The irony is not lost on me that this is the same combination I now embody that I thought I was rejecting in high school. So funny. My sister says that she knows our grandma would be proud of me. I hope so. I think of her all the time, especially when I have a question that I know she would have an answer for. The primary motivation for this podcast and livestream series is to share what I've learned this last decade to help you create your own sustainable living and life. I'm excited for what's next. More patterns using up what I have on hand, and more chats about creative business topics. Like the March 9th live stream, where we are going to be talking about decluttering your creative space as a way to inspire even more creativity. Or my upcoming interview with Crispina French about Earth Day and sustainable crafting on March 22nd. Thanks so much for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review. It really is the best way to help others find craft leftovers too. Until next time.